Hello, everyone. In this short series, we'll be talking about a SAML 2.0. So, SAML 2.0 is a protocol that is used by many big companies uh, even today. Though people say that it's been superseded by another thing called OIDC, SAML 2.0 is widely used, and it is good to understand what this protocol is all about and why this was created in the first place. So, in order to understand why this SAML 2.0 was created, so we need to go back in time to understand the problems this SAML 2.0 solved. So, let's, for example, take an user like John, for example, and he uses his favorite browser. Let's assume it's a Chrome for in the scenario, and he has to access like a web application, one, and which is also has like a database in the backend. So in an architecture like this, the user logs in to the web application and then the web applications performs some kind of services for this user. So in this kind of an architecture, the authentication and also the authorization is actually performed by the web application itself. So the user sends his login name password, and then the web application looks up the database, which is here, and then it allows or either denies access to this user. So in a scenario like this, the username, the passwords, the last name and first name, and email, phone is all stored in this database, and which is what the web application is having some kind of a business logic to whether to allow or deny the user. So in modern terms, this authentication is also called as authn, and then authorization is called auth-z, right? So we will be using these two concepts or naming conventions interchangeably. So what is the problem with this kind of an architecture, right? So let's, for example, take another app, another web application like web app 2, which also has another database. And let's say Sam, another user, pretty jam here, is using like Firefox to access this web application. So the authentication and authorization, which we saw in the web app 1, is not usable in this scenario. So web apps 2 has to also do the same thing, like authentication and then authorization in order to authenticate Sam. So the user details of Sam will be stored in another database and it will be same as before, right? So what are the big challenges you see in this kind of traditional architecture back in the 2000s? So in this scenario, if Sam needs to access web app 1 or if John needs to access web app 2, they have to remember two sets of credentials in order to access their applications. Of course, they may use the same login name and password, but again, that's another security risk we'll address in a different use case. But in this, if you follow this along, they need to have two sets of credentials, and also the database stores different credentials. So this is one big challenge. So let's summarize what we saw here, right? So so the first thing is the user has to remember many passwords, and then you might have heard about multi-factor authentication, right? So in architectures like this, doing MFA is not easy, right? The web application itself has to do the multi-factor authentication. The logic, everything is stored in web app 1 and a web app 2. So it's not simple to implement that. And the other important risk is the creds are sent to app itself, right? So for example, the John sends his username and password to the web application, and then SAM sends the login name and password to web app 2. So the web application has access to the login credentials, which there's a potential for it to be stored in like log files, and many people have access to those sets of credentials as well. And the last major problem is credential duplication, right? Creds are duplicated. What do I mean by that is the credentials are stored in this database, and when you back it up, again, this is stored in many different places, which is not ideal for this case of scenario. So this is one challenge, and in the next video, we will talk about how to solve this problem, and we'll take one such solution, right? I mean, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty details of why SAML and other concepts like OIDC was created, but at least we'll take one step at a time, and so that you can understand the whole process. So let me get back. We can meet again in another video very soon to talk about how to solve this very problem.